Welcome back to another episode of the Joyful Mama podcast. I am your host, Morgan Ellis, and today I have a very special guest, my husband, the other Morgan.
Ta-da!
Yay! And obviously, our little sidekick, Pepper, if you're watching the video, is
needy
right now. But we are celebrating our 13th wedding anniversary in a couple days, and so we wanted to do an episode. I wanted to do an episode, and he has graciously gone along with my idea to do an episode on building a strong marriage even after having kids. So I don't know what we're calling this episode yet. It might be like Margaritas with the Morgans, where we talk about marriage. Cheers.
Morgans, margaritas, marriages.
Morgans, margaritas, and marriage. It's very lame. We're going to work on the title, but anyways, so we have gathered up a couple of questions we're going to ask each other. We're going to talk just about some things that have helped us build a strong marriage, and obviously we're 13 years in. We don't have all the answers, but
we're still building.
But we're still building, and we're still having fun and loving each other, and despite having children, we love them and we love each other. So we're talking about that today. So
okay.
Yeah, let's get started. Welcome to the Joyful Mama podcast. I am Morgan Ellis, your host, and this is a space to help moms in the trenches of motherhood find joy. My goal for this podcast is to talk about the good, the hard, and everything in between so that you can feel less alone and encouraged in this journey of motherhood. So grab yourself a cup of coffee or just put in the headphones while you're doing the dishes or the laundry, and let's find joy in motherhood together. Thank you so much for being here. Let's go. All right. Who wants to start? You want to ask me a question first?
Okay, I can do that. So
before we get into questions, let's give everybody a little backstory on us, a little bit of maybe our story and what we do when we're not being parents.
Or podcasters.
But do you want to tell our abridged version of our story?
No, because you just put me on the spot right now.
Okay, so we met in college, freshman year of college, and long story short, we met through a mutual friend and kind of just fell in love very quick, but we dated all through college and got married at 22.
Immediately after graduation, the next time slot available at the wedding venue. And and a Gator bye week.
Yes, we went to the University of Florida, so having it be a Gator bye week every year of the weekend of our anniversary was maybe intentional.
It might be one of those keys to our healthy marriage.
Maybe, because the Gator football has been on the struggle bus basically since we've graduated. So,
well, I might not always remember our anniversary day, but I do remember the week that the Gators have a bye week.
Okay, well, I'll take it for a win. Gotta laugh, gotta have fun. But just some of the charm that attracted me to him was his wit and a lot of puns. He had dad jokes before he was a dad.
There's a lot.
Yeah. So got married at 22. We had our first son at 24, Gabriel, and then we had Elijah and Adele quickly after that. So 3 kids before we were 30. So we are still very young. We're 36. I'm 36. He's almost 36. Married an older woman. And so, yes, we obviously have a lot of growing to do still, but we have a very strong, healthy marriage. And I think that's something that a lot of people desire. And we still have young kids, so we can speak to that a little bit. But so that's our backstory, the very short version.
And when you're not a mom, you're not.
When I'm not a mom,
you are.
And I'm not doing this or not writing, because that's another love of mine, is I am a hairstylist. So by trade, I do hair, and that for a long time was a very full-time job, but now I have the blessing of doing that more on a part-time basis. And so I get to really be a mom and a wife first, and then all those other little things fall into their proper place.
Well, when I'm not being a mom and a wife, I guess real estate is just like the word to kind of sum it up, because I help people buy and sell houses. We buy and sell houses, have several houses, and then there's property management for other people. So it's phone calls all day long to clients and contacts and subcontractors and employees and agents and all the things. So phone is just kind of nonstop. I'm the guy on the phone.
He is, and I'm very glad I don't do your job, because, ooh, no, not for me. But you do a very good job at it.
Sometimes.
I think so.
Good.
So, all right. So we're going to get into some questions that we thought of to ask each other, that I think our answers hopefully can bring you some value as parents, as moms, husbands, if you're listening, as dads, and just in your relationships with each other as husband and wife. Building a strong marriage, I think, is key to building a strong family. And I think we all want to do that. We all want to build strong families. And yes, all of our families look a little different and have had different twists and turns and roads to get where we are. But I think what we have to share can be used in all different types of families. Our story is unique and won't exactly be like yours, but
I always just think that if you can learn one thing from a conversation or one thing from a person, if you take one thing out of this that makes your marriage a little bit better or reinforces some things that you're already doing right, I think that's just all it is. So one thing would be great, but we're going to share a couple things.
Yeah.
And apparently I'm going to start.
He's going to start. I'm putting him on the spot as my very first guest.
All right. So there's 5 love languages from the book, The 5 Love Languages. And can you remind us real quick of what those are?
Yes. So if you have not read the book by Gary Chapman, I will link it in the show notes. But the 5 love languages are words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, gifts, and physical touch. And so I think, the main concept is that we all have one kind of main love language that we receive love, maybe a secondary one, but then also ways that we give love.
Right.
So,
and those might be different. The way that I receive love and give love might be a little bit different. But I think it's important for us to know not only what ours is, that we can communicate that with each other, but to know what theirs are, and even like their giving love language. Because if I know what her giving love language is, then I know the different ways that she's telling me I love you, even if that's not really my receiving love language. That happens.
Yeah.
So, okay, so with the 5 love languages, what is your receiving love language? What is your giving love language? And then can you give any examples of those?
So my main receiving love language, especially since becoming a mom, is words of affirmation. And I don't think it's always been that way, but it's definitely something that has been highlighted for me in the last decade, over a decade of being a parent, and what that means for me is just being appreciated and acknowledged for the things that I kind of just do around here. Laundry, dishes, cooking, cleaning, a lot of the mundane tasks that us as moms do on a daily basis, that I like to receive words of affirmation and appreciation over those things. Not that that is what gives me my value, but it does make me feel loved. And so What was the second part of the question? How do I give?
Yeah. How would you say, what is your primary maybe giving love language? And then what about an example?
So I think my primary giving love language is probably acts of service, although I know yours receiving love language main one is physical touch, and I try to be good at that too.
Oh, don't let me answer that. Okay.
No. Which probably is why acts of service for me, maybe I like to receive words of affirmation, is because acts of service is something that I do to give love and to take care of others. And I think I also try to give words of affirmation to others. That is something that I have noticed in myself. But yeah, so those are mine.
Okay. What about any examples? Can you think of any?
An example of a acts of service for me to you, to our family, is definitely taking care of the home. And I know that's not every woman's job. It's not, how everyone operates, but, just I enjoy cooking dinner and I enjoy serving our family in that way and having a clean home and just going out of my way to make things a little bit easier and less distracting so that when you are home and the family is home, that I can be more present with everyone who's here.
All right, now I guess I'll answer that too. Let's see, receiving love language. You already said it. It is physical touch, physical touch, physical touch. Those,
all men love the physical touch.
Gotta say. But that's also, a kiss before I leave for the day. That's, snuggling up on the couch, and just being right there. And even though we don't necessarily need that, right? But I feel like you kind of do. I do, at least. I need those things. And I would say my natural kind of giving love language is probably also like acts of service. And it's not something that I ever expect to hear anything about, although I feel like I'm George from Seinfeld sometimes. Like, I want to make sure you just notice like a little bit. At least you saw what I did, because otherwise, yeah, I'm doing the dishes and stuff, which is maybe not normally part of the things that I am always doing. But if it goes totally unnoticed, it's like, well, at least I still did a good thing. But
so you like your acts of service to still be noticed.
Well, I like to be noticed. It doesn't have to be necessarily said, but if I just do it, you might not actually know, because you do it so many times that it could have been you. It really could have been.
The ratio.
You might do it like 9 out of 10 times, and then I do it the one time, because I just see it and I do it. I think it needs to be done. But part of the acts of service, which I think also speaks to your receiving, which is words of affirmation, I think, is flowers. So I feel like I bring home flowers as that's part of an act of service. For me, it's an act of service, but I think for you, it also kind of fills that words of affirmation. And so I kind of just made it a habit for a very long time. So, and when you make a habit, it's a good thing, because you just kind of do it automatically. But I just got in this mindset every time I go to the grocery store and I see flowers or anything, I'm just going to buy you flowers and bring them. So sometimes I might bring you flowers like 2-3 days in a row, because I went to the grocery store to pick up 1 or 2 or 3 things. Go to Sam's Club, there's flowers, I'm bringing you flowers. And it might be kind of expensive after a little while, but I know that if I don't do it, I'm not going to think about it. Therefore, you're not going to feel loved. So I just do it anyways.
Which is a note to all the husbands. Maybe buy your wife some flowers this week. Although not every woman loves flowers, but it's true. Nice to be thought of and appreciated. And yeah, that you go out of your way and think of that. That does make me feel loved. And I love that you do that.
Good.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
And this is more specific to just you. So, what is one piece of advice you would give to men, husbands, dads listening about building strong marriages and families?
Well, with building strong marriages and families, I'm just constantly reminded from when I was in Men of Iron, which is a Christian men's mentorship program. and they just had this diagram that's really just stuck with me. And the diagram was a bullseye, and it had all the different relationships, and it kept expanding out. And the number one focus, the bullseye, was God, was Jesus, was keeping your focus on him. And then after that, the next one right there, like the second bullseye, is your wife, your spouse, right? And then after that, there's your kids, and then there's your other extended immediate family and friends, and it just keeps expanding out. But it's so important because I think many people get that mixed up. Either they have their kids prioritized over their spouse, which is no good. I think most people kind of realize that, but I think just as bad is putting your kids on the same level as your spouse, because they are not on the same level. Yeah. God kind of has ordained this through the Bible, through his word, and that's also why he has pictured the relationship with him and us as Christ being married with the church, right? And so we're supposed to emulate that. Our kids are supposed to then emulate us, whether we like it or not. They're going to emulate us, right? They're going to see a relationship between mom and dad, and they, for better or worse, might be emulating that. So if our eyes are focused on Jesus, if their eyes are focused then on us, then they're going to have a good picture, a healthy picture of what a relationship should be.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so good, especially for us as moms, to hear that we can so easily put our kids first, and we naturally put our families and especially our kids above ourselves, and we fall to the back burner. But how often does our marriage also fall to the back burner? And so to remind the moms, to piggyback off of that, right? The men, but also the women, that we would prioritize God and then our relationship with our spouse and our marriages, and really nurture that so that there's enough love to go to the next level for our kids. And so I love that. And I would echo that advice for the women.
So you're just going to answer the question, ditto?
Ditto. Yes. And I'm going to take a sip while you ask me my next question.
Oh, okay. Let's see. The next question I have here is, what do you think is the most important thing, the most important tool in our marriage?
Well, I think that goes really well right after that question is the Bible. I mean, that sounds like a Sunday school answer, but the most important tool, right? If God's word is alive and active and used for teaching and correction, it's the most important tool we can use to learn how to be the best versions of ourselves. So the number one tool is the Bible, but in the sense of, like you said, having God at the center of it. And I think we do a good job at that. You know, we try really hard to nurture our faiths individually and together. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's my answer for that one.
Okay.
What about you?
All
right. What would you say?
If I have to answer, I would have to say communication. Like, communication is key. And so there's several parts to communicating, and that's not just talking. Yeah. But talking, and then there's hearing, listening. Hearing and listening are different, by the way. But when you talk and you're trying to explain something to your spouse, maybe that they're, let's just say, doing wrong, or it's bothering you, you're not liking, not just that you have to be careful, walk on eggshells. That's not the point, because sometimes you have to tell them the hard truth, but you got to do it in the nicest way possible, right? Because you care about this person. You're not trying to hurt their feelings, but ultimately, if it's something good for your relationship, you have to be okay hurting their feelings too. Sometimes I tell you things, or you tell me things that hurts my feelings, right? But it's not about walking on eggshells between one another so that each person is just feeling hunky-dory all the time, because that's not going to happen anyways. But it's about building a bigger, better, brighter future together through communication.
Yeah. And I think communication and talking, and the difference between hearing and listening, because so often, even us as parents, moms, that we end up talking at our kids or at our spouse, and we're not communicating in the kindest way. So, communication is so key in every relationship, but I would say foundational in building a strong marriage. And if we communicate well, then we are also modeling that for our kids.
Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully, I mean.
And if you just want somebody to hear you, you just speak louder, you just yell, right? They'll hear you.
Guilty.
But they might not listen to you. And the whole point when you're communicating is you want to do it effectively so that they not only will listen, but they will want to listen. So remembering, communicating is not speaking. It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Because our body language makes a difference, our posture, if we're smiling or not, there's time to smile, but there's also a time to, really hunker down and be serious. Yeah. And then when they're communicating, listening, because hearing and listening aren't the same thing, right? Yeah. Hearing is, listening is hearing plus doing. Like there's an action required, because you can hear all day long and do nothing about it. So you really didn't listen. You didn't care enough to do something about it, right? We don't ask our kids when we say turn off the TV and they don't turn off the TV. It doesn't really matter if they heard us or not. It only matters if they listened, which means did they do what we asked them, which is turn off the TV. Yeah. So it's the same thing with our spouses. Like we don't want them to just hear us and just absorb all this information on how maybe the things that they're doing are hurting us in some way. But we want them to respond to that and go, oh, you know what? Maybe I'll try to do something differently. And so not just hearing and then acknowledging, but then making some sort of change. We're not trying to change our spouses, but there may be some things that they can do more effectively to communicate with you. Yeah.
And we're not trying to change anybody, but we all should be growing as humans.
Right. And growing is changing, right?
Throughout our life. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we're changing all the time. So communication, it's key. All right, next question for you. Okay. All right, as the sole provider of our family, but I also know that a lot of families look different and that each spouse holds different roles. This just happens to be our situation. How would you say that you make family and our marriage a priority and balance that with your job?
So balance is kind of a tricky thing, but work-life balance is always mentioned, and you're trying to make sure you're not working too much, but that you're making enough money, because in many cases, the more I work, the more money I make. But when is enough enough? Yeah. That's one question for sure. And it's different when you're talking about money than when you're talking about family. When is enough enough? There's really no enough, right, of your family and those good things. But you can't just spend all the time with your family and not work, because then you're not going to provide for them. That's no good. And just the opposite. You can't just work all the time to support your family and not spend any time with it, because then what is it good for? Yeah. So, one of the things that we do before every trip, where we get to hopefully retreat and relax and do fun things together, is we always have this discussion. Usually you bring it on and you say something to the effect of, I hope you don't work too much on this vacation. And me hearing wants to just immediately scream back, because it's what's going in my head. Like, I thought I did a really good job last time. I don't work too much when we're on vacation. I work 60 hours a week. I worked 6 hours on the last trip. That's pretty good, but that's not always what you mean. And so I need to be, and I do try to listen and go, okay, this is something that's important to you. So by listening to that, we've outlined some expectations, because with my job, it's not realistic to just say, I'm going to throw my phone in the water or off a cliff on this vacation, and no one's going to get to reach me, because the world still turns and people still need to get paid and people still need to get jobs done. And that is what supports our family to be able to go on those vacations.
Although I would love it if the phone got thrown into the ocean.
Yeah, but then I have to pay for a new phone. Then the finances need to work more.
Totally. It's not a realistic expectation.
So we try to set those expectations, and we try to make an agreement. It's sometimes like a negotiation where I say, okay, look, my goal on this family trip is to maybe work an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, and try to maybe only take a couple phone calls, like during lunch or something. Everyone's eating and I can step away for a minute, make a couple calls. And if I can do that, then I'm really trying to avoid the times that we want to spend as a family. And I try to do the working activities outside of that, which does cut into our personal time alone together sometimes. But, it's the trade-off where it's not a perfect balance, but we're trying to do that. And when it's just us, me and you on a vacation, it's kind of the same expectation. We're usually waking up and going to bed around the same time, but I'm still trying to take some of the wee hours on either end to maybe work a little bit so that we can enjoy more of the day than not. And so that I can put my phone down and away. Maybe I go, okay, I'm going to only check my phone every 4 hours or something. That sounds really great, right? And so that usually ends up making you happy enough about it, and me going, okay, the world's not going to fall and spin without me. And then a lot of times what ends up actually happening is that I end up working, less than even what I mean to. But sometimes the reverse, and things happen, emergencies, I work a little bit more, but we're working towards the same expectations.
Yeah, I think what I hear most in there is being intentional with your time. And then we communicate and have a proper expectation of what that can look like, because you do have such a unique job that isn't just from 9 to 5.
Yeah.
So, and that does help our family have as much balance as it can that needs to fluctuate at certain times. So.
And we just watched the movie Reagan, and there was a really great quote in there where it goes, clarity is strength.
Yeah.
So in communicating, I think that is right. Clarity is strength.
And if we're trying to build some strong marriages, having clarity in our communication, in our expectations, and what is building those expectations. Is it how we saw our parents? Did they have this amazing marriage that we feel like we can't live up to? Or is it from movies, media, things like that? And even social media can play a part in that. It's such a love-hate relationship. I'm sure a lot of you can relate with comparing ourselves, but then we end up comparing our families, the homes we live in, the cars, our spouses to other people's spouses. And it's such a dangerous territory to compare other people and what they have or don't have to what you have, and how God has specifically blessed your family. So like you said, we're not trying to change anybody. We shouldn't try to change our lives to look like anybody else's, but then be content and find joy in the life that we have, and the spouse that we have, and the kids that we have. And yeah, so being intentional with your time.
Okay.
Super important. I love that.
So finishing out the last questions here.
Yeah.
Are what is the best marriage advice you've received? And who said it maybe? And then what's the worst?
So the best marriage advice that I have received, came in the form of that book, The 5 Love Languages. So when we were first married, my parents invited us and kind of dragged us to a conference by Gary Chapman where we really learned about the 5 love languages. And I think that was pivotal, especially at that time in our marriage. I can't remember if we had Gabriel yet or if I was pregnant.
It was definitely kind of at the beginning of our marriage, first 3 to 5 years for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And that gave me, and I think us, the language of our feelings and how to love each other well, and even just the knowledge of how I am loved. That was really pivotal. And another thing is from the Bible, I know, but it says in Ephesians 4, verse 26, to not let the sun go down while you're still angry. And to go back to all the talk of communication, I think that's something that we have done really well in our marriage, is that we really try to talk about everything. And
that's super hard sometimes.
Yeah.
There's been tears.
It definitely is not easy by any means. And sometimes it's very late nights trying to hash things out.
Yep. 2, 3 in the morning, maybe.
Yeah. And sometimes it's tearful, but anything worthwhile is probably not easy. And I think that really taking the time to talk about the hard things is so valuable. And just like we were talking about earlier, is like, it's kind of like a muscle that you have to build, that it doesn't always come easy, but it will become easier to talk about things because you're going to see the fruit of it. You're going to know that it's valuable because it's, and it will build on itself.
Well, something super similar would be like public speaking, right? That's super scary, especially the first time you do it. Usually it's still a little bit scary every time you do it after, but it gets a little bit less scary. At least it gets to be easier because you've been through it before. So once we finally do get it through, number one, I think we both agree that it feels better to get it out there.
Yeah.
Because we're both, we know we love each other. We know that by talking about these things, even if we don't always fully agree, that we're going to continue to love each other, and we're not going to let these things build up.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we maybe are angry, and then it becomes bitterness.
Yeah.
And then bitterness turns into resentment. And then resentment turns into a broken relationship, because you can't resent your spouse. You can be angry with your spouse. You might be able to be bitter for just a short period of time, but then it does turn into resentment, and you can't resent your spouse. If you do, you're going to end up with a broken relationship, and you're going to have to really, really dig in and work hard. So if you do this, if you do the hard things up front, you won't have to do the really, really, really hard things later.
Yeah. Yeah. And another verse that kind of goes along with that, which comes earlier in Ephesians chapter 4, because that's just like it's a really good chapter. I suggest you go read the whole thing. But Paul, who wrote it, said, "Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love." And I think that should be our marriage verse, like
for communicating.
Because it's so much of it is being humble and having humility and admitting if you've done something wrong, being able to receive maybe something that hurt that other person, because I definitely know that I don't always talk in the nicest tone if I'm frustrated, and you'll call me out on it, and it doesn't feel good to be called out when we're wrong. But if we pause and are humble enough to receive that, then we can, usually I can grin and say, yep, he's right. I'm not being very nice. And, we can move forward together, because if you have any resentment in your marriage, it's not gonna end well.
No. One last thing probably on communicating is that men and women, we obviously communicate in different ways. Men tend to not communicate enough.
Yeah.
About their feelings that they talk about. And women like to talk a plenty lot and then expect you to read between the lines like nothing that they actually said.
Yes, we do that a lot. There's a lot of subtext to all the things that we say that we expect you to
Which
understand.
We both need to be aware of, and I think we both are. So making sure that maybe you talk to your spouse when you notice they might be talking in between the lines, because for me, I just tell me like it is. I'll get it then. But if you talk around it, I might totally miss it. And then likewise, I can't expect you to understand anything that I don't say. So
True.
if I don't make a comment in a kind way, right, you're not going to make a correction, or you're not going to know how I feel. I can't just not say anything and expect any different result.
Yeah.
That would be the definition of insanity.
Yep. And I've had many conversations with women, which really, this is making me think of that. And it's really funny because all of us are like, I just don't want to have to ask him or tell him to do the things. I just want him to do it. I don't think men work that way. I think we just have to like straight up ask for what we want.
That would be so much easier.
Way, in a kind way, in a gentle way, because that's how we properly love each other.
All right, so not taking up too much time, but what was the worst?
Oh, yeah.
Because we went off on a tangent.
We did go off on a tangent.
The worst advice.
The worst advice I've ever been given on marriage was from someone who very early in her marriage, and they've been married a long time, probably over 40 years now, told her husband, if you want to go be with someone else, you want to wander, just go. Just understand I probably won't be here when you get back. And that's such a worldly way of thinking, and it's so negative. And although I understand where she was trying to get to, of like, sure, go do what you want, but I'm not waiting around, that feels like that's the opposite of what we're supposed to do in our marriages. We're supposed to fight for each other, and we're supposed to be very clear of, no, I don't want you to be with anybody else.
That was terrible advice.
Yeah, it was terrible advice. And I think that we just have to take our marriage vows seriously. It's a vow that you made to this other person in front of family and friends and God. And if that's a vow that you made, then it's a vow you should keep. Obviously, there's extenuating circumstances and not healthy relationships, and there's abusive relationships, and that's not what we're talking about. We're taking the time from the beginning to build a healthy relationship. And that takes two people wanting to do that. So that was the worst. What was the worst advice you've ever been given?
Okay, we'll start with the worst. So I would have to say the worst advice is probably something everybody's heard. Probably everybody said. I know I've said it, sometimes in a jokingly way, but it sounds very true. Happy wife, happy life. On the surface, that sounds really great, right? Just make your wife happy and everything will be great in your whole entire life. But happiness should not be the goal of your marriage. Yes, you want to please your spouse. Yes, you want them to be happy, but happiness is a feeling, and feelings are fleeting, which means they just don't stay forever. So it'd be this constant goal of trying to make somebody happy, and at what expense? Happiness is circumstantial.
Right.
I'm not happy if something bad happens, but I might still be joyful because I'm choosing to be, but I can still choose to be joy, which I think is like this. It's hard to explain, but maybe it's part happiness, but part thankfulness at the same time. Gratitude is in there, So anyways, I think that's just the worst advice.
Yeah, which actually reminds me of another book that I read, which is called The Sacred Marriage. And one of the big takeaways I got from that book was that the purpose of marriage isn't to make you happy, it's to make you more holy. And I think that goes with being joyful, is if we choose to love this imperfect person that we married like Jesus loves us. And sometimes that's hard, and sometimes that's through difficult circumstances, and just choosing to love one another, choosing each other.
Right. Well, those conversations that we have that are tough don't make us happy.
Right. They don't make us happy in the moment, but if we didn't have them, we would be much more unhappy later. Of course. All right. So then what's the best advice you've been given?
So the best came from a friend, trainer. His name is Ellis. And when I thanked him a couple of years later, it's so funny. He didn't even really remember that he said it. But then he goes, yeah, I don't know if I really even believe that. But I thought it was great advice. Absolutely great advice. He goes, his dad had told him once he got married, and I think especially when he had his first kid, he goes, son, you don't matter. Whoa, that's like a huge, ego drop, right? Like, you don't matter. It's what? No, so it's really just about being selfless to your spouse, right? You got to put your spouse first. Do you matter in the sight of God? Yes, right? We all do. Yeah. But it's just that humility, that selflessness that you portray towards one another and towards your kids. Like, especially when you have a kid, now you really don't matter, right? Because you've got to make sure that their needs are met and provided for. Like you do have the 5 languages, you do need to feel loved. Actually, the Bible does tell us that, men need to feel respected and women need to feel loved. And so it commands us, men, love your wives, and women, respect your husbands, right? And so those are things that we actually do need, and we provide those needs. And it comes out in many ways, and sometimes those are ways that we want. But it is about that selflessness and that humility that we need to be. And I tell the kids, like, all the time, you can either be one of 2 things. You can be selfless or selfish.
Yeah. And
fish stink. So which one do you want?
Yeah.
Usually they say selfless after I say that.
No one wants to be a stinky fish. But that's so good. And it's true. It's obviously you matter. We all matter. God loves us all. That's not what you mean. It's just, I love that you said it's the humility and it's the selflessness, because being a parent and being a spouse are both very selfless roles that we have as humans.
I was definitely more selfish before we got married.
Right.
And before each kid. I feel like each one of those things has forced me to, in a good way, to be a little bit more selfless.
Yes.
But guess what? When we're less of ourselves, we can be more like God.
Woo! All right. We're going to end on that because that's really good. Okay, but before we do that, let's do our big takeaways of how to find joy in our marriages, even after having kids. I think our biggest one was to have God at the center, right? Number one.
In the bullseye.
To communicate well. That includes listening. That includes being kind and gentle with how we communicate. And I think the third one would be being intentional. Yeah, intentional with your time. And then maybe on an equal level of that is just being humble. Having humility in loving another imperfect person and being willing to grow and change together and work through hard things. And so.
And if you're going to add another one, we'll say margaritas.
Ooh, yeah. Because if you comment on this post, on this video, or on this episode, we will send you the recipe to this man. He's a master mixologist of margaritas. He has figured it out. And so we'll send you the recipe. And if you don't drink, then we will make sure to send you the mocktail version. But cheers to 13 years of marriage and to many, many more. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode, that you got some little nuggets of wisdom from us in the trenches of raising kids and building our marriage, and that you can go build some strong marriages and families together. So until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you feel a little less alone and a whole lot of encouragement. It is such a joy to be here and be on this journey of motherhood together. If you liked what you heard, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And don't be shy, come connect with me over on social media or at morganaellis.com. Thank you so much again for listening. May you always find joy, even in the chaos of motherhood.